Welcome back to Global Currency Watch, the channel where we focus on facts, fundamentals, and real economic developments shaping Iraq's future. Before we begin, let me ask you something. What if one of the most important developments for Iraq's economic future had absolutely nothing to do with exchange rates? What if the signal investors should be watching right now isn't a rumor, a leaked bank screen, or another prediction about the Iraqi dinar? What if the real story is happening quietly at Iraq's border crossings? Because that's exactly what's happening. This week, Iraqi officials revealed details of a major customs modernization plan involving the federal government of Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government. At first glance, it sounds boring. Customs systems, tariffs, cargo tracking, revenue monitoring. Not exactly the kind of headline that grabs attention. But here's the surprising reality. Many economists would argue that these kinds of reforms are far more important than any exchange rate speculation. Why? Because before a country can become fully integrated into the global financial system, it must prove that it can track money, monitor trade, collect revenues, and enforce laws consistently across its territory. And that's exactly what Iraq appears to be working toward. Today we're going to break down what the ASYCUDA customs system actually is, why Iraq and the Kurdistan Regional Government are working together on this agreement, how unified customs procedures could affect trade and investment, why international institutions care so much about transparency, and what all of this could mean for Iraq's long-term economic future. This is not a prediction video. This is not about dates. This is not about rates. This is about understanding the infrastructure that serious investors, international banks, and global institutions look for before deeper economic integration can happen. So stay with me until the end, because once you understand the bigger picture, you'll see why many long-term observers believe Iraq may be entering a completely different phase of economic development. Let's begin. What is the ASYCUDA system, and why does it matter? To understand why this customs agreement is generating attention, we first need to understand one simple question. What exactly is ASYCUDA? ASYCUDA stands for Automated System for Customs Data. It was developed by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development to help countries modernize customs operations. Today, dozens of countries around the world use ASYCUDA to improve trade efficiency and revenue collection. Instead of relying on paper documents, manual calculations, and disconnected systems, ASYCUDA creates a digital environment where customs officials can track shipments, monitor imports, calculate tariffs, and collect revenue more efficiently. Think of it as a modern operating system for border management. Every shipment entering the country becomes easier to track. Every customs payment becomes easier to verify. Every revenue stream becomes easier to monitor. And that's where things become important for Iraq. For years, one of Iraq's biggest challenges has been revenue leakage. Money that should have entered government accounts sometimes failed to do so. Different border crossings operated differently. Procedures varied. Monitoring wasn't always consistent. That creates opportunities for inefficiency, corruption, and lost revenue. The new customs agreement aims to address those issues. According to reports, the draft agreement would establish unified customs tariffs, federal customs regulations, centralized monitoring systems, real-time cargo tracking, improved revenue transparency. That's a significant shift because for the first time, Iraq would be moving toward a much more integrated customs framework across the country. And when governments improve revenue collection, something important happens. They become less dependent on emergency financial measures. They gain more predictable income stream. They strengthen budget planning, and they improve financial credibility. Those are exactly the kinds of improvements international investors like to see. Because investors don't just invest in natural resources, they invest in systems. And strong systems create confidence. Why customs reform is bigger than customs. Now let's go one level deeper, because this story isn't really about customs. It's about trust. Think about how international companies evaluate countries before making investments. They ask questions like, can contracts be enforced? Can revenues be tracked? Can goods move efficiently across borders? Can financial transactions be monitored properly? Can corruption risks be reduced? These questions matter because businesses want predictability. When billions of dollars are at stake, predictability becomes extremely valuable. And that's why customs reform is often viewed as an economic credibility reform. The more transparent the system becomes, the easier it becomes for foreign companies to operate. The easier it becomes for banks to process transactions. The easier it becomes for governments to attract investment. Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has repeatedly emphasized modernization, transparency, and institutional reform. This customs initiative fits directly into that broader strategy. Notice what's happening simultaneously: border reforms, digital monitoring systems, anti-corruption initiative, banking modernization efforts, electronic payment expansion, revenue transparency projects. These aren't isolated events. They're interconnected pieces of a much larger economic transformation. Imagine building a modern skyscraper. You don't start with the top floor. You start with the foundation. The customs reforms are part of that foundation. They're designed to create a stronger, more transparent economic environment that can support larger goals in the future. That's why many analysts are paying attention. Not because customs reform changes everything overnight, but because it strengthens the systems underneath the economy. And strong systems create long-term opportunities. What international institutions are really watching? One of the biggest misconceptions in the dinar community is the idea that international institutions focus primarily on exchange rates. In reality, they often focus much more on institutional strength. Organizations like the IMF, World Bank, and international banking networks care about questions such as: how transparent is the financial system? How reliable are government revenues? How strong are compliance procedures? How effective are anti-money laundering controls? How stable are institutions? Why? Because these factors determine whether an economy can sustain growth. A stronger economy requires stronger institutions, and stronger institutions require transparency. The customs agreement directly supports that objective. Real-time revenue monitoring means policymakers gain better visibility into economic activity. Digital cargo tracking reduces uncertainty. Unified tariff systems create consistency. Consistent systems improve confidence. Confidence attracts capital. Capital supports development. Development strengthens the economy. That's the cycle policymakers are trying to create. This is why many observers believe Iraq is transitioning from planning to implementation. For years, discussions focused on ideas. Today, more attention is being placed on execution, actual systems, actual infrastructure, actual reforms. And that's a meaningful distinction, because implementation is where transformation becomes visible. The big takeaway for long-term investors. So, what should long-term Iraq watchers take away from all of this? Here's the most important point. The customs agreement by itself does not change Iraq overnight. It doesn't instantly transform the economy. It doesn't automatically trigger any specific monetary event. But it does represent something incredibly important: progress. Real, measurable, institutional progress. And progress matters, because economic transformation rarely happens through one giant event. It usually happens through hundreds of smaller reforms working together. A customs modernization program here, a banking reform there, a digital payment initiative somewhere else, a transparency measure somewhere else. Over time, those reforms begin reinforcing one another, and eventually they create a stronger economic foundation. That appears to be the direction Iraq is pursuing. The customs modernization plan, the digital tracking systems, the transparency initiatives, the revenue monitoring tools, the anti-corruption efforts. All of these developments point toward a common objective: building a more modern, integrated, and internationally credible economy. Will challenges remain? Absolutely. Will every reform move smoothly? Probably not. Economic transformation is rarely a straight line, but the broader pattern is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The focus is shifting from promises to implementation, from discussion to execution, from plans to systems. And that's why this custom story matters far more than many people realize. Because sometimes the biggest signals aren't found in dramatic headlines. Sometimes they're found in the quiet structural reforms that strengthen an economy from the ground up. And right now, Iraq's customs modernization effort may be one of those signals. If you found this analysis helpful, make sure you subscribe to Global Currency Watch, turn on notifications, and stay connected for future updates focused on facts, fundamentals, and real economic developments. Thanks for watching. Stay informed, stay patient, and I'll see you in the next video.